If evil always looked evil, the world would be easier to survive. But sometimes evil looks familiar. Sometimes it is calm. Sometimes it passes a lie detector. And sometimes it sleeps in the house next door. In 1984, American investigators were trapped inside one of the darkest murder cases in U.S. history. Young women were disappearing around Seattle, and their bodies were being found near rivers and forests. The police had fear, pressure, and a growing list of victims, but they did not have a name. The victims were not wealthy women with powerful families. Many were runaways, sex workers, or young women living on the edge of society. And that made the case even more painful, because at first, many people thought they had simply left town or disappeared by choice. But then, the bodies started appearing near the Green River, in wooded areas, in places so quiet that even the trees seemed to be hiding something. With every discovery, Seattle became more afraid because the killer was still invisible. Investigators had almost nothing, no clear witness, no reliable description, no strong physical evidence. Every time they thought they were close, the trail disappeared. The killer seemed to know how to leave a body without leaving himself behind. The investigators decided to take a very unusual step. Someone proposed an idea that sounded almost insane. If they couldn't understand the killer, why not ask someone who already did? At the time, one of America's most notorious serial killers was sitting on death row, waiting for his execution. His name was Ted Bundy. Bundy had spent years hunting victims, manipulating people, and hiding in plain sight. Investigators believed that if anyone could recognize the behavior of a predator like the Green River Killer, it might be another predator. So, they met with him. And what followed was one of the strangest moments in criminal investigation history. Detectives sat across from a convicted serial killer and asked him a simple question. How would you catch a man like this? What Bundy told them was disturbing, because many of his observations would later prove to be frighteningly accurate. And, for the first time, the hunt for one serial killer was being guided by another. Bundy said something that disturbed the investigators. He believed the killer might return to the bodies, not just to hide evidence, but because in the killer's mind, the body was control, a trophy, and a silent witness that could no longer speak. But the man they were hunting was not hiding in a cave. He was not living in the wilderness. He was not walking around like a movie villain. He had a job, a home, a wife, a church, and a face nobody feared. His name was Gary Ridgway. But the world would come to know him by another name, the Green River Killer. And the scariest part was not how strange he looked, but how normal he seemed. But to understand this case, we have to go back to the beginning, because this was not an ordinary killer. And what comes next is almost impossible to believe. The story begins in the early 1980s around Seattle, Washington. Police began receiving reports about missing young women. At first, the disappearances did not create panic, and the reason was painful. Many victims came from vulnerable lives. Some had run away from home. Some lived on the streets. Some were sex workers. So, when one disappeared, the police did nothing. But when the bodies began to appear near the river and in the woods, everything changed. These were not random disappearances anymore. Seattle was facing something organized, silent, and terrifying. The newspapers gave him a name: the Green River Killer. At first, it was just a headline. Then it became a nightmare. People started connecting every disappearance, every rumor, and every dark road to the same invisible man. While the city was afraid, Gary Ridgway was living like an ordinary man. He worked as a truck painter. He went home after work. He spoke quietly. People saw him as simple, shy, and forgettable. Gary was not charismatic like Ted Bundy. He was not a criminal genius from a movie. He was plain, and that was the danger. He could stand beside you in a store, and 5 seconds later, you would forget his face. Gary's childhood was filled with fear, humiliation, anger, and emotional chaos. His relationship with his mother was deeply complicated. He feared her, resented her, and stayed attached to her in a disturbing way. One of the earliest warning signs came when Gary was around 16. He attacked a young boy who survived. At the time, it did not expose the future killer. But years later, investigators would look back and see the darkness had been there all along. After high school, Gary served during the Vietnam era, then returned home and tried to build a normal life. Marriage, work, routine. From the outside, he looked like a man trying to settle down. But the darkness did not leave him. This is what makes the story terrifying. Gary did not look evil. He looked normal. And society is very bad at fearing normal people. We wait for the monster to look like a monster. Gary did not. As the investigation grew, police received hundreds of tips. Suspicious cars, strange men, reports from the SeaTac area. The suspect list became enormous. But information is not proof, and the case was drowning in information. Among those names was Gary Ridgway. Witnesses reported a vehicle like his near places connected to victims. Others described a quiet man approaching women from his car. Slowly, Gary moved from ordinary worker to serious suspect. Police brought Gary in and questioned him about his movements, his relationships, and his contact with women. But he stayed calm. Too calm. No panic, no breakdown. No sign that investigators were sitting across from the man they were hunting. But what happens next? will haunt you, because after this moment, there will be no doubt. He was one of the most dangerous killers in human history. Then, investigators asked him to take a polygraph test, a lie detector. Gary agreed without resistance. He sat down, answered the questions, and then came one of the most disturbing moments in the case. He passed. Can you imagine how cold, calm, and emotionally controlled a killer must be to do something like this? The man, who would later be known as the Green River Killer, passed the test and walked out. No arrest, no confession, no conviction. Police had questioned the right man and still had to let him go. That moment may have made him more dangerous. If the police could question him, test him, and release him, then Gary knew one thing clearly. They had suspicion, but no proof. Gary did not need to chase victims. His method was trust. He looked harmless, spoke calmly, and seemed like an ordinary working man. That false sense of safety helped him get close. Afterward, he left the bodies in remote areas near rivers, roads, and woods, places where rain, animals, time, and water could destroy evidence before investigators ever arrived. Time worked in his favor. The forest hid things. The river moved things. Weather erased things. And the longer a victim remained undiscovered, the harder it became to find the truth. But the media attention did not stop Gary. Later, he admitted that when newspapers talked about the killer, it fed something inside him. Fear did not weaken him. It made him feel powerful. While police searched, Gary kept living quietly. He went to work, came home, attended church, and acted like any ordinary man. That contrast is what makes this case so disturbing. His wife later described a man who could seem normal, but also showed sudden anger and tension. It was as if two versions of Gary lived in the same body, the quiet husband and the predator. Then, something strange happened. The killing slowed dramatically. Investigators wondered if the killer had died, moved away, been arrested, or simply stopped. The truth was stranger. Gary entered a new relationship and later married again. His third wife described their life as surprisingly normal. Work, home, chores, church, marriage. For a while, the monster became quiet. Years passed. Families waited. Detectives aged. Evidence sat in storage. Then science changed. DNA technology became stronger, and old evidence that once seemed useless suddenly became dangerous. Tiny biological traces preserved for years began to speak. This time, police were not relying on rumors, memory, or a lie detector. Science was pointing directly back to Gary Ridgway. On November 30th, 2001, police arrested Gary at his workplace, a truck painting facility. His co-workers were stunned. To them, he was not a serial killer. he was just Gary. After his arrest, Gary eventually made a deal. He would confess, answer questions, and help locate remains. In exchange, prosecutors would not seek the death penalty. When Gary began talking, his coldness shocked investigators. He did not confess like a man destroyed by guilt. He spoke calmly, almost flatly, as if he were describing a routine.
You took the lives of 48 women. You snuffed them out. More than 48 women.
71, yes.
Right. You killed them all, Ridgway. You killed them all.
Officially, Gary pleaded guilty to 48 murders in 2003. Later, another confirmed victim brought the number to 49. He claimed the real number was higher, but the confirmed legal number remains 49. In court, Gary Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Not one life sentence, but multiple life sentences. No release, no second chance, no return to society. But even that sentence could not bring back the victims. The Green River Killer case remains terrifying because Gary was not a movie monster. He was a worker, a husband, a churchgoer, and a neighbor. Sometimes evil is calm, sometimes it is familiar, sometimes it passes a lie detector, and sometimes it sleeps in the house next door.